Yeah, very warm welcome, Jeff. And they already know about you because your work, particularly your work, Geeks Who Bring Gifts, and it's been part of my module since 2014 when you started publishing. When you gave it free in the medium. Jeff has been Jeff is known to be a very influential figure in journalism, and he's been a blogger, and Bus Machine is his blog, and he's been a voice of change and innovation for a long time. And his work is, just I shared the work with you, because every year I share his work because they're still available for free on Medium. And he's been a consultant for a long time, and he's consulted for the, including the major platforms, including the Guardian US, just for Guardian UK.
Both.
Both. Then New York Times, and New York Times, and he does a very interesting program. I've been following him since he started because his expertise is primarily in entrepreneurial journalism. Jeff, by the way, I have news for you. Carrie Brown has also agreed to talk to us.
Oh, you don't need me. You don't need me at all. Carrie is the star.
No, she's going to be talking about something else, not social journalism. And he's been consultant for a long time, and he's been a voice for change. So, and I've been chasing, Jeff doesn't know that I've been chasing Jeff since 2015. Then he agreed to talk. Then he got caught up in Italy, International Film Festival, rather Journalism Festival. And that speech, when you gave that speech, and that was in Perugia, right? Italy? Yeah. And that speech, so that after, then 2015 students asked me, why don't you get Jeff for a session? So, and he responded, then one thing or the other, just he got too busy, and thank you. It's been we are honored to have you, Jeff, here. And couple of more things. He was named one of the 100 top influential leaders in media industry by no less than World Economic Forum in Davos. So welcome to ACJ, Jeff. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I am honored to be here. I love the work that you do and the school. I wish I were there in person. I've not yet been to your beautiful city, and I hope that soon we can do this. I hope you're all staying healthy and safe.
Joel.
I'm sorry what we've done to the world out of America in terms of Donald Trump and the disease. So, I pray that you're all doing well. As soon as Dev asked me to come and talk about social journalism, I immediately said yes, because I love this topic. I love social journalism, and what we're able to do with it. Carrie Brown is the person who actually started the program. It was. So here's Geeks Bearing Gifts. And I'm happy to send you the PDF so it's easier to read for free. In that, I wrote about a new relationship strategy for news. And our dean, Sarah Bartlett, read the first third of the book and said, do we really teach this in depth at the school? And I said, no. And she said, how about a new master's degree? I said, cool. And so we started social journalism. And it's hard to explain what social journalism is to some people, I think, because people tend to think social media, but it's much more than that. It's also often called engagement journalism, which is probably we're going to use that phrase more often, but I don't like that much either because it sounds like you're engaging with my content. The essence of social journalism is to view journalism as a service, not as a product. Since the days of Gutenberg, since printing, since journalism was created, the first newspaper was created a century and a half after movable type. Newspapers took their form in the centuries thereafter. We tend to think that we're in the business of making a product that we print filled with something we call content. And that content is our stories, right? And that's what we teach, and that's what we've done forever. I think the internet breaks open that thinking so that we now reimagine journalism as a service. And yes, stories are part of that. They are one tool we have, but there are so many other tools we now have thanks to the internet. So content fills things, services accomplish things. And the effort is to imagine that we are providing a service that means we have to help people do what they want to do. And that means that first and foremost, we have to listen to them. So social journalism at Newmark starts not with story ideas. It starts with finding a community that is self-defined. And by that I mean not an external definition like a demographic. I think that millennials is bullshit. No one goes up to you on the street and says, "Hi, I'm a millennial," right? You don't feel an affinity to that. So the students find a community that has its own self-definition. And that means that they share interests, they share needs, they share circumstances, they share goals. They may know each other, they may not know each other. There was a book by Benedict Anderson called Imagined Communities. And in a sense, this is an imagined community, whether they really know each other or not. So they find a community, and then they observe and listen to that community. And I've learned more and more the similarity between this kind of journalism and anthropology. The anthropologist has a discipline of observation and evidence, and they spend time with communities to understand their needs, to empathize with those needs. And then it becomes important, I think, to reflect those needs back to the community, to say, did I get you right? Did I understand you, what your needs are, what your goals are? And then and only then, when you've developed that kind of trust, yes, the journalist gets me, yes, you understand my needs, yes, you've spent time here, then you can start to imagine the journalism that we bring. And that journalism can take many, many different forms. It can be stories, yes, or it can be plays. One of our students 2 years ago was serving a community of women who had been abused, and she used the theater of the oppressed to have them act out their stories and change the endings, for example. Another student 2 years ago was a recovering addict, and she used databases to provide resources to the community. Another student had lost a sister to addiction, and she created the mechanism for people to, families to come together and empathize with each other. Another student was working in food security and was spreading information through the city gardens in New York, and so on and so on and so on. So they find these communities, they listen to and observe these communities, they build a relationship and we hope trust with that community. And then after that, they can start to imagine what to bring. We teach design thinking, which is kind of a fad out of Stanford University, but it's a useful way to think about this, because in design thinking, you kind of move an accordion in and out, right? And you observe and listen to the community for inspiration. I don't believe in doing surveys. I'll come back to that in a second. I believe more in qualitative listening to the community so that you can understand their needs. And then you come up with some inspiration, some ideas, and then you focus in on what the community's need is. And then you imagine things that can solve that need, and you come up, brainstorm lots of ideas. And then you come back down to something you're going to try and work on. And we have them go through this process to imagine what it is that they're going to do with and for that community. So in all this, I've learned a lot about journalism by teaching this program. I've learned from my students. And let me talk about a few things there. First, it has gotten me to redefine journalism. I have tenure at my university. I can do whatever I want, so I redefine journalism. And my definition, my working definition and mission of journalism now is to convene communities into respectful, informed, and productive conversation. I'll say that again. To convene communities into respectful, informed, and productive conversation. Because I believe firmly that what we're about in journalism is to help improve the public conversation. There's someone you should read who's better than I am at this, named James Carey, who the late Columbia University professor, who wrote about this, who said that republics are conversations, preferably cacophonous conversations, noisy conversations. And I think what's happening in society is that we are relearning how to hold a conversation with ourselves after 550 years under the sway of print and Gutenberg. And I think that we don't know how to do it again. And so we're messing up. So yes, Twitter and Facebook can be a mess. Yes, people are angry with each other. Yes, we see disinformation and bots. Yes, there are problems. But there are also all kinds of wonderful things we can now hear we could not hear before in mass media. So the primacy of the conversation is what matters to me. How we listen to that conversation. James Carey said, and Jay Rosen said, summarizing James Carey, that journalism does not inform the conversation so much as it is informed by the conversation. Journalism doesn't start with us. Journalism starts with the community. What are they talking about? What are their needs? What are their goals? And how do we help them meet those goals? And we can only learn those things when we enter into conversation. The internet is not perfect at this. The internet, as I said, has lots of problems with this. I think we're in very early days. I'll come back to that. Another lesson I learned in social journalism is to look at internally focused versus externally focused journalism. Right? Externally focused journalism is what we've always done. We come and find a story and we write that story for the whole world, for our newspaper, our show, right? And it wasn't a bad thing to do. We're still going to do it. It matters. But that was the only tool we had. Now we can also be concerned with the internal needs of a community, the information needs of a community. And sometimes we do that in ways that is not for the whole world. Some of our students at the school a few years ago did a project on mold in public housing in New York. This is a major problem. And they arrived in the community and talked with the community leaders, got their trust. They decided not to just write a story and extract that story to tell the world about, oh, public housing, poor people have another problem. Instead, they decided to stay in the community and help teach the community how to detect mold, how to fight with the city, how to get rid of it, what health issues were there, and so on. And so that was about the internal information needs of that community. And I think it's a very good example of how that works. Now, the interesting thing was, at the end of the semester, at the end of the project, they talked to some of the community leaders again, and one of them said, thank you. Thank you for not just coming in and taking our story and leaving. Thank you for caring and staying. Thank you for empathizing with us. But this community leader said, how did you pick mold? If you talked to me first, I would have told you that mold's a problem, but it's probably about number 5 on my list. And that was a very good lesson for us as journalists, that we think we set the agenda of journalism. We don't. Publics do. And so we have to understand their needs and have a skill around listening if we are to do that. Now, as I mentioned, the internet, I think, is not yet good at listening. The internet was built for speaking. Listening will come next. You need both to have a conversation. But I value the speaking part of the internet. I think it's quite important that we can now hear voices who were not heard in mass media that was run in the United States by people who look like me, old white men. And I think we can see, especially in the crises we're having in the United States right now, how this has played itself out. So in the COVID pandemic in the United States, what we're seeing very clearly is that African American and Latino Americans are suffering the brunt of the disease in terms of getting it, in terms of dying, in terms of bad hospitalization care. This reveals, of course, then the incredible inequity in my country. the systemic racism in my country. Now, this is not news to a Black or Latinx American, but it is somewhat news to white Americans because white media didn't really live it and thus cover it. And so what I want to see happen in journalism is for us to rethink every area of coverage around inequity. How we can cover health anymore without first looking at equality and lack of equality in care, I don't know. How do we cover the economy and jobs and business and the culture, entertainment, sport? We have to look at this throughout with this lens of inequity because we haven't in the past. Our newsrooms are not diverse, and this is a major issue. The other story going on in the US, of course, you've seen through the news here, is the murder of an African-American man by police holding a knee on his neck for more than 8 minutes, George Floyd. And the movement that then came out of this in the United States and that spread across the world. Well, of course, this spreads back farther, but I think it's important to look at what social media brought in this case with the hashtag as the platform. Black Lives Matter. Without social media, we wouldn't have had Black Lives Matter. It was social media that enabled people who shared a need and an interest and a goal to declare that, to find each other, to assemble, and to act together. We saw the same with the Me Too hashtag around feminism and misogyny. We saw the same with the Occupy Wall Street hashtag around economic equality. And it's the internet that allows this. Now, I often hear journalists in the US say, oh, Twitter, Facebook, it's a mess. It's horrible. Stay away. And I get very angry with them when they say this, because what they're saying is, I don't want to listen to the new voices. I have the stage. I'm not going to share that stage. Well, we as journalists have to share that stage, that spotlight, that microphone, that power of ours with our communities. We follow them. The third story in the US, of course, is Donald Trump, which is revealing how bad American media are at covering things that are truly unusual. We make everything normal, and Donald Trump is not normal. Just yesterday, his attorney general compared having to stay home during the pandemic with slavery. This is how offensive these people are, and we don't know how to cover them in media. And so what we're seeing happen is that people are bringing their own coverage, in essence, to social media. And we need to help them do that. So I said before that the internet is not yet built for listening. And I'm trying to write something right now where and I'd love to hear your thoughts on how to make the internet better at listening. You know, I think there are a few things about this. One, just because we can all speak doesn't mean that everything is worth listening to. We need help finding the things and the people that are worth listening to. That's how we add value to the conversation. We need a better picture of what that conversation looks like as a whole. I get very angry too when I see reporters write about Twitter says this, or Twitter says that, or Twitter's angry today. That's a mass media way of looking at the world, as if Twitter were a thing. Twitter is not a thing. It is a bunch of individuals. It is millions of voices of individuals, and that's the value of it. You can find single people and talk to them in a way that mass media never could. So I've learned how to rethink journalism. I've learned about this notion of internal and external. And the third lesson I've learned is about the relationships of communities. So when we assign, I'll take blame for this myself. When I assign the students to say, go find a community, identify that community, listen to their identification and their definition of that community, observe and listen to them, and so on. To a student, every student came back with more than one community, because it was always about the interaction of the communities and the friction where their relationships occur. That's where the journalism is needed. And so I realized that sometimes you end up trying to improve the lot in life of one community by affecting and informing the behavior of another community. And that's a critical way to look at this. So one of the ways I think the internet could get better at listening is by creating a place where people can tell their stories to be heard in safety so that we can make strangers less strange. And whether that cuts across class or race or sexual identity or anything, religion, is that what happens now is that the sense of the other is exploited so that people can manipulate our conversation and bring up hate and fear. Well, we've got to fight that. We've got to figure out a way to build bridges among those communities that may be in conflict. That's a very different role for journalism. So in everything I'm saying here, you might accuse me, and I hope you will challenge me, you might accuse me of making journalism into advocacy or activism. I'm not afraid of that question. Carrie and I deal with it with every class, and we grapple with that. What is the line? What does that look like? Now, I think that we've always been advocates. We've always advocated for the little guy against the man, for justice, for fairness, for equality. So we've always been advocates for people, in a sense. But what separates journalism from community organizing or politics or partisan work is that we have our own standards, and we have to maintain and know what those standards are. And I'll start with the obvious ones, but again, I'm eager to hear yours. Fairness, accuracy, completeness. Those are things that we care about. But we also have other standards that we are questioning and perhaps discarding. So one discussion we have in the US is around objectivity or impartiality. They're not quite the same, but almost. And there was a belief in the US that journalists should be objective, that they basically don't have a view. Jay Rosen calls it the view from nowhere. But the recent discussion here has been that objectivity is a power dynamic, that the old white men in the newsroom decide what's objective and what's not. And so when an African-American journalist comes into the newsroom and says, I have a story about this, or I want to cover this, they're often told, oh, you can't cover Black America because you're Black, which is ridiculous because white America covers white America all the time, because you're not going to be objective, because you have a lived experience. There's a very good book out now by a transgender journalist named Lewis Raven Wallace called The View from Somewhere, in which he got fired from his job in public radio because he wouldn't agree with their views of objectivity. And he said that his lived experience brings value to journalism. How he sees the world brings value. Now, he has to be careful to not let that color his journalism to the extent that he's purely an advocate. He has to have intellectual honesty and tell people the uncomfortable truths that he finds. He has to serve truth and accuracy first. But still, his lived experience brings value to this. And we see that too. And so we talk about that with our journalists, our social journalists, a lot. You don't have to cover a community you're part of, but you can. You also do have to learn how to cover communities you're not a part of, because that's part of the skill of journalism. I want to give you a couple quick examples of this, and then I want to get to conversation. I'm quite fond of a company called Spaceship Media. Spaceship Media is very small. A woman in California named Eve Perlman runs it. But what I told you before, my definition of journalism is to convene communities into respectful, informed, and productive conversation. That's exactly what Spaceship does. So I think it's a very good example of conversational, dialogue-driven journalism, social journalism. So I want to tell you how it works for just a second. The first example of what Spaceship did was after the 2016 American election, where they worked with a newspaper and they found 25 women who voted for Donald Trump in the American South, 25 women who voted for Hillary Clinton in liberal San Francisco. Journalists talked to them all, got to know them a little bit, then they threw them all into a private Facebook room. And the first day was fine, but before long, it became hell. because they were fighting with each other, just like America. And so members of the communities came to the journalist and said, we're getting in trouble over here. Can you look up some stuff for us? Well, I think that was a miraculous moment, because what they were saying was that they valued an informed conversation. They wanted facts, and they trusted the journalist to get them. And what Spaceship then delivers is not a story about their conversation. What Spaceship delivers is what they call fact stacks. Here are the facts you asked for, the facts you were wrong about, the facts you were debating, the facts you didn't know and needed, the facts that confused you. Here, we're going to help your conversation be better. And our students have worked for the company, and they also come back with a methodology for how to have a respectful conversation, right? They'll see someone ask a question that's a little nasty, and they'll say, here's how you could rephrase that to learn what you want to learn. And they have methods to try to improve the conversation. Well, I think that's the essence and future of journalism online, because we're all having a conversation now, and it's not a perfect conversation. It's a flawed conversation. So how do we in journalism imagine we help that? Another company is called City Bureau in Chicago, where they train citizens to go cover a board meeting, a school board meeting, and they pay them a little to come back, so that journalism is collaborative. Another is Outlier Media, which is in Detroit, where people can text in questions and get answers back. Sometimes the answers are the same answers 100 people need. Sometimes it reveals a new problem that they can investigate. And then I just found out about one last week, and we had a session with the woman who founded Body Politic, which is a queer feminist health site. When COVID came, the two top people at the company got COVID, and they have had continuing problems with COVID. And so they started a community of people who had COVID, a support community. They used Instagram at first, but quickly it grew too big for Instagram. They switched to WhatsApp. Within one day, it was too big for WhatsApp. And now they're on Slack, and they have 14,000 members as of last week, probably more now. And these are people who are sharing needs. They're sharing help with each other. They're sharing questions. They're bringing in experts to help answer their questions. It's a community built around conversation and information, and I quite like that. So let me end here with one more point that I like to make, which is I think that we are very early in this transition into the internet. I'm working on a book now, I hope, trying to look at the Gutenberg age, at the age of movable type and print. And the story I'm about to tell is, I'm sorry, based in Western world in Europe, because that's the way it's been written. And that's what's changing now, is that we're now global. But if you look at the beginning of movable type, it did start, in fact, in China and in Korea, but it didn't spread for a bunch of reasons, including the alphabet involved, until 1450 with Gutenberg. And it spread quickly then. But it did not come until a century and a half, 150 years after movable type, in 1605, was the first regularly published newspaper in Strasbourg. It took a century and a half to imagine what you could do with this tool of printing. It took that long for Montaigne to write essays and invent that form. It took that long for the modern novel in Cervantes and Don Quixote to come along. It took that long to imagine what printing could fully do. So I think we're very early in the internet. The technology of printing didn't change fundamentally until about 1800, with the first press made of steel. About 1840 with steam power, which led to mass media. 1900 came the first competitor to print, broadcast. 1950, television, and here we are in 2020. Well, what did I leave out? Obviously, the internet. And I marked the beginning of the internet at 25 years ago, with the introduction of the commercial browser. And that brought the whole internet to everyone very easy. So we're only 25 years away from that. In Gutenberg time, that would put us about the year 1475, with a long stretch of development in front of us. So I think that we don't yet know what the net is. I think that we're just beginning to understand that it can do things that aren't the same as the past. We're still trying to take books, magazines, and newspapers and find a home for them online. In my research for this book, I've been struck by how the early history of print was very conversational. Martin Luther, the reformer of religion in Germany, when he wrote in print, he chose to write in German, not in Latin, so he could speak to a public, to a people, and enter into a conversation. He argued with the Pope and with others in print. It was conversational. The earliest newspapers came out of letters. They would reprint letters from correspondence around the world. It was conversational. I think we lost that conversational sense of media somewhere along the line. And the internet is bringing it back to us. But we have to learn how to have that conversation. And that's why social journalism, to my mind, is so important. That what we're learning is this skill of conversation. And we can help communities do better at it themselves and society as a whole. And we need that help in society right now. We need to learn how to do this. And so what I'm saying to you in the end is, it's early days. The internet's not finished. It's not done. We don't even know what it really is yet. We don't know what it can do. We don't know what we can do with it, good and bad. We have choices to make. And those are your choices. I'm too damned old. The reason I teach is because I want to watch and help you, students, reinvent journalism. So in journalism school, I urge you to learn everything Dev and your teachers teach you, but then question it. Ask, why do we do it this way? How did we get here? Now, oftentimes you're going to find the answer to that question is money. The way that newspapers and TV operate the way they do is because of the economics of it. We can have that conversation if you'd like. But the economics have changed. And newspapers are going to change, and some are going to die. And we have an opportunity, I think, especially with COVID in the US, some papers are going to go away, and they're going to burn down. But then up from the ashes can come new businesses. So we just started we announced a new program at the school it's a new version of entrepreneurial journalism. Not so much about starting a company, but about an individual journalist finding a way to make a living at doing journalism, serving a small community, using the tools that we now have. Right? Obviously, you can have websites and blogs, but you can also have newsletters and podcasts, and you can use Facebook groups and WhatsApp, and you can write books. You can have events virtually or in person when we come back after this scourge of the pandemic. You can use theater. You can use comic books. You can use all kinds of tools to do journalism, to bring journalism to communities. And you can start to earn money in new ways. It's not guaranteed. It's very risky still, but YouTube does pay if you're popular. Medium pays. Patreon enables a community to support journalism. Kickstarter and other companies. There are these methods and means to try to make enough money to perform your journalism. Maybe not working for a newspaper, maybe not working for a TV station, maybe instead starting your own small venture to serve a community that has long been underserved by journalism. And there are many, many of them around the globe. So I just want to encourage you to reinvent journalism. That's the point of social journalism. That's what we're trying to do, is to reimagine what journalism can be and should be to serve communities. So there I'll end, and I'm eager to have the conversation with all of you.
Jeff, can we start from the chat? Yeah, can we start from the chat, please?
Good, perfect. So I see AJ says, do you want to ask your question, AJ, in video?
Yes, sir, I'll ask it. Sir, students are often asked to treat people as just sources in some J schools, but you touched upon the importance of qualitative listening. So should journalists dismiss the idea of treating people as just sources? Where do we draw the line between these two?
AJ, that's a great question. It's one I'm grappling with right now with my students. So the problem with thinking of people as sources is that we extract value from them. I want to take your story for me, and I want to make value out of this. How do we instead leave the value with the community? That's one question. But we have a brilliant journalist at the New York Times named Nicole Hannah-Jones. She did a really major project called the 1619 Project about slavery in America, which began 400 years ago last year. And she's brilliant at this, and she fights hard around this. And I interviewed her for a conference called ISOJ a few weeks ago. And we were talking about the idea of reparations, of repairing our relationship from the past, of what do we owe today because of the sins of our fathers in the past. And I was asking about the reparations of journalism. One of the people in the questions in the chat on Zoom was a science journalist. And she said, I want to involve more scientists of color in my reporting. But sometimes I hear from them, will you pay me? My work is worth value. And the answer, of course, immediately is no, we don't pay. We don't pay for journalism. I know this is an issue at the Times of India and others we can discuss, but that's the belief is, that's part of our ethic. And Nicole said that some years ago, she'd done a story where she spent like 3 days with a man in the South who was helping her. And at the end, if you're an international reporter, we call that being a fixer, right? You're the person helping. And at the end, he said, can you pay me? And she said, no, we don't do that. And she realized that that was wrong. And so she said, in our conversation, she wants to find that man finally, years later, and pay him for his work. And I started talking with a colleague of mine at Newmark then about this. And I think it is a very interesting question you raise, because it's what's the line between the subject of a story, the source of a story, the and the freelancer and the storyteller, right? And I can see a world where we don't take a source's story. Instead, we help them tell the story, right? We become a teacher of journalism to them, a teacher of tools to them. We help them tell their own story. Well, in that case, who's the writer? Who's the freelancer? Who gets paid, right? It starts to change the entire relationship in ways that we can't imagine. Now, one of our students asked one of our professors just last week, she said, my source says, will you pay me? I'm a scientist of color and my work has value. And I know that if we asked the faculty of this school that today, the faculty would say, no, we don't do that. We don't pay for journalism, right? And there's reasons for that. There's good reasons for that. But maybe we need to rethink those rules. So it's a very good, your question is a really good example of how we have to reimagine what our role is with the community. And I hope that you will bravely reconsider what that could be with your professors, not against them, with them. Does that kind of answer the question?
Yes, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ajay. That's a great question.
Jeff, would you prefer people asking questions in video?
That's fine. Sure, we can have a conversation, whichever works best. Dev, why don't you call on them?
Yeah. Okay,
how's that?
Yeah. Abhirami? Yeah. You can ask now.
Sir, I have 4 questions. Is that okay?
Yes, of course.
Oh.
Okay. So, sir, my first question is, you mentioned that we should show all the sides in our news coverage. Karl Popper, he gave a paradox that to practice tolerance, one must be intolerant of intolerance first. Does this mean that we should accept the unacceptable opinions in our reporting while expressing it?
Okay, so let's do them one at a time. Brilliant question. Brilliant question. So after the American election, when Trump was elected, I had a conversation with our social journalism class, and we talked about empathy. We talked about understanding people. And the black students in the class said, no, I'm not going to empathize. I don't owe empathy to people who have never tried to empathize with me and my people. I can't do that right now. The racists have just won the White House. No, I can't do that. And I said, as a human being, you're right. As a citizen, you're right. But as a journalist, are you right? And what is our obligation to not so much tolerate unacceptable opinions, but understand them and understand their root and understand where they come from. So the New York Times, which is a great newspaper, but it does, because it's a great newspaper, we criticize it more than any other newspaper in the US because we want it to be the best. They did a story some time ago, kind of a, well, what are these white nationalist Nazis like? And I remember it was awful because they kind of said, well, he eats at the same restaurant we do. He wears pants like we do. They made him normal, right? And that's wrong. He's a racist. He's a Nazi. He's a fascist. You shouldn't make that normal. Yes, you should judge that opinion. Yes, it's okay, in my view, to judge that opinion. Now, so when you report it, you have to report it, in my view, in context. You have to bring context to this. You have to recognize that that opinion is out there. You have to report that it's happening. But I think that you do have an obligation to try to present context and history of it.
Okay, sir. So I have another question. It's a bit long. So, sir, you spoke about objectivity. You said that we must be accurate while reporting the experiences of our community. If we are being objective by pointing out the flaws or shortcomings in the community we belong to, won't that mean that we are giving up the ethical values of loyalty when it comes to the community? When we still believe in an ideology and point out the flaws, at the same time appreciate the good policies in an opposing ideology, does this make our journalism objective or our ideology based on scientism? Oh,
I'm smiling at all these questions. They're brilliant. They're great. Excellent question. When a professor says that, they're trying to buy time to find an answer. I'm glad you wrote it down so I can see it again. The reason we say there's no such thing as objectivity is because that presumes that we don't have our own worldview and our own perspective. And so the belief is that we have to start with transparency about ourselves and our own worldview and our own lived experience. And whether that has an impact on our reporting, and we let the public decide whether that does. So that's one part of this. And so if you're, I'm gonna give you a different example, which doesn't really answer the question, but I think it starts to address it a little bit. Part of your question is, who are we loyal to? And I remember a reporter who's now the CEO of a media company, Quartz. He told about covering a financial scandal, a Ponzi scheme, which is to say that people were investing money in something where that was valueless. And he realized that as he was reporting this, that he was, and he cared about these people, and he got to know them, and they were his sources, and they were a community of people. But as soon as he reported in the Wall Street Journal that their investment was valueless, they would all lose their money. Now, if he only cared about the community, he would have not reported it, right? But he did report it because he had to, because he had a higher obligation to the truth. He had a higher obligation to the people who would follow, so they wouldn't invest in this. And so he told them an uncomfortable truth, which is they had invested in this valueless thing. So his obligation was not to the community, his obligation was to the higher truth, but he did it with empathy with that community. And even if it's if it's not money, if it's an ideology, if it's racism in the US, you can have empathy with someone who's unemployed or someone who's afraid they're going to lose their job. You can have empathy with parts of what that is, but you need to point out the falsity of their argument that it's because immigrants are taking over from white people that they're going to lose something, right? And that's where I think we have to go. Just making sure my daughter didn't need a printer. 3.
So what we have been taught that journalists should ask all sorts of questions. Does that include uncomfortable questions too? If yes, where should we draw the line while asking uncomfortable questions?
How do you define uncomfortable question?
Which might be sounding inappropriate, personal, prying.
I think a few things. One is we have to respect people's own lines and culture and privacy.
Yes.
And we don't ask questions just to extract from them, but people are generous and they will often share more than we can imagine. So I think that what we say is basically say the obvious. You don't have to answer this question, but I need to ask you.
Yes, sir.
And see that. And then cancel culture. Let me just go ahead and address that. So the idea of cancel culture, I think, was expressed well by a professor in Canada who said that there are two things going on here, two camps. One is the people who want to increase the things that are on the list of things that are unacceptable in respectful society, right? So years ago, when I was young, men would call women girls, and it was acceptable. Now that is clearly unacceptable. That would be sexist, misogynist for me to call you a girl. You're a woman. Well, what happened there? Society renegotiated its standards and norms to add something to the list of what is unacceptable. That's a normal thing that we do. Then there's the other side of this argument that says, no, if you do that, you're taking away my words. You're taking away my freedom. You're scolding me for what I do. I don't want that. You're canceling me. And she called those people the status quo warriors. And I think the larger thing that is occurring now, it goes back to my discussion about Twitter and Facebook and social media, is that we have the people who used to have the microphone and they owned the microphone. It was theirs. And now we have so many people who have new microphones and they can speak. And the old people with the old microphones resent that. They say, no, I have the power. I have the attention. And I don't want you to set the rules. And so all we're doing is we're negotiating norms. This is a normal process in society. So I don't think there's any such thing as cancel culture. I think it's people who resent people with a new power. And I think that's exactly the kind of conversation that we have to bring journalism to. So thank you for your 4 questions. That was great.
So one last final question. It's
Sure.
Lee. What do you think makes a good journalist? It's for me, sir.
Curiosity, openness, an ability to listen, an ability to empathize with people, an ability to understand context and history. And I'd say that's my answer.
Yeah. Khadija? Yeah.
Yes,
guys,
sir.
can you stick to one question, please? Khadija, please. Yeah.
Yes, hello, sir. My name is Khadija. And my question to you is that you spoke of an obligation to a higher truth. But today we are living in a world where everyone has their own version of the truth. And even with reference to a new documentary called Social Dilemma, which has come out and talks about these echo chambers or silos of opinion, which has led to a hardening of belief that people hold. So given this status quo, how do we as journalists then shape public opinion meaningfully? And how do we get them to come out of these echo chambers and accept a differing point of view?
Good question. I think the first way we start with is the research about whether, in fact, there are filter bubbles and echo chambers. And there is research to say that that's not true. That, in fact, the internet opens us up to more opinions and more views than we had before. There's a book by Axel Bruns, B-R-U-N-S, who I'm trying to find, I just tried to mention it yesterday, about filter bubbles, in which he argues that there's no such thing as filter bubbles. And he has research behind this. So I think that we have this presumption that, oh, we know how the internet operates. We have the opportunity to do research now. I would use that research, especially where you're a university, to question this. There's a very good researcher at the University of Texas named Talia Stroud, who does work on this. And in fact, the man who wrote the book that defined filter bubbles now realizes that he wasn't quite right. So Now, having said that, clearly we do have people who only want to hear certain things. I think we start with the mask. Where in the United States, we have a president who refuses to wear them, and we have people who stupidly, dangerously, immorally refuse to wear masks. So we've got to decide, how do we convince them that this is important? Well, I don't know. I think that we have to call upon other academic disciplines to understand better how the brain operates with this. I read a fascinating book called How History Gets Things Wrong by Alex Rosenberg that says that our entire theory of how the brain works is not borne out by science and research. And that, so I think we need to go to cognitive scientists and neuroscientists and psychiatrists and anthropologists and reconsider how people take in information and how they come up with these views so that we can imagine how to have an impact on that. Now, we have to be careful that we don't become propagandists ourselves, that we see ourselves instead as educators, because the science clearly says that this is valuable. This will save lives. And so it is, I think, a proper thing to say that our goal is to convince people to wear this. Well, that's advocacy. That's propaganda. But I'm okay with that because it saves lives.
Ishan, you're next.
Yeah, I have actually written my question there. Let me just find it because I forgot what it was.
Okay, Bhavya then.
Yeah, hang on. Yeah, okay. Bhavya, do you want to go ahead?
No, it's fine. Why don't you go ahead? I have like a shortish question.
So I'll just read it out, whatever I have written here, because I've forgotten about it. Okay. So it is refreshing to have someone who tells us that it might be okay to get involved in the story. As you pointed out, there are too many voices on the internet and not all of them are voices of sanity. Honestly, social media scares me at times. Anything can blow out of proportion and journalism is not science. Reporters get things wrong all the time, but platforms like Twitter can shoot out the information before we get a chance to post an erratum. Besides, not everybody is doing journalism out there. While you have something like New York Times, you also have something like Fox News. So how do we balance out the good that platforms like Facebook can bring out and the crisis like Myanmar that Facebook was responsible for? So how do we balance these things out? Yeah, that's
so I don't think it's a good question. It's a profound question. I don't think we know yet, and we're trying to figure this out. Facebook is trying to figure it out. I think Facebook's goal should be the same as the goal I gave journalism: to convene communities into respectful, informed, and productive conversation. And Facebook is not doing that. Facebook is saying all conversations are okay. I think they've got to set more standards. They've got to recognize when they're being manipulated. They've got to recognize when people are using the platform for ill ends. And they've got to model good behavior. But I also think it's important to recognize that Twitter is not media. As I'm fond of saying, Twitter is not the New York Times, it is Times Square. It is a place where there are many people who are saying things that are right and wrong, smart and stupid, helpful and not. And that's the public conversation. And so our job now is to create the tools to find out who's worth listening to in that conversation, who has value in that conversation, and what we can do as a result. Yes, we have Fox News, and Fox News to me is far more dangerous than anything on Facebook and Twitter in the United States. Myanmar is a whole different story, obviously. Again, I'm just going to say that it's early days. We're figuring it out, but I get worried about those who want to regulate the internet, who want to shut down speech, who say there's too much speech, and those kinds of things. I think that's a dangerous view too. All we're doing is hearing the public speak. We're starting to hear the things that have always been there. We now have to recognize, and we have to create journalism for that.
So these platforms are essentially what they're profit-making platforms, right? So can we expect morality from profit-making platforms? Like their end goal is profit. They don't care about whatever crisis they're doing in the world.
Well, one can say the same about most media companies. We are profit-making platforms that try to get people's attention. We use sensationalism and hate and fear and division to do that. I mean, I've watched Indian television when you have a screen filled with boxes of people yelling at each other, just like we have in the US. What's that? That's a profit-making platform that's trying to make money on division rather than on understanding. So yes, it's an issue. It's an issue for us too.
So let me just get it very clear. What you're saying is that you are against regulation, right? You are against any sort of regulations on social media.
No, I'm not. I was part of
But
a.
okay.
If you look up it's a long title, but I can send it to Dev link. The Transatlantic High-Level Working Group on Content Moderation and Freedom of Expression. I'll send it to you. I was part of a group that recommends a form of regulation built around transparency and accountability. So I'll send that on.
Okay, thank you.
Bhavya?
Yeah. So I just have a really short question, sir. So when you talk about empathy and communities and how journalists should hinge on empathy while reporting on different communities and their clashes and the friction, as you mentioned, what kind of role would empathy play then in a new media setup on the internet, especially in the post-COVID world where people might not have access to these communities in person? How would we then hinge on empathy for our reportage about communities and with communities?
I think it comes back to listening. And I know I'm sounding glib, I'm sounding a little cliched when I keep on coming back to this word, but I think we're not good at listening in journalism. We tend to come up with a story idea first, and then we go out and we have our notebook and we look for quotes to fill in a narrative we've already imagined. And people feel then as if we are extracting value from them, as if we are exploiting them and their stories. So that's why I think that the empathy begins with making sure that someone knows they've been heard. And we do that by listening. And then we do that by reflecting that back, by saying, did I hear you correctly? Did I understand you right? That's a form of empathy. Now, again, to the earlier question, if you're a Nazi, I don't think we have to empathize with your views. We might treat you as a human being and model a behavior about how we think that you ought to behave too. So I'm not saying that empathy means that we accept the unacceptable, but it does begin with showing people that they're heard.
Just to add something small to this, when we look at communities and we want to look at community engagement, especially in the post-COVID world with new media, how often should we look at the question of access? Like, do these communities have the access to new media facilities so that we can reach them?
Yeah, I think this is obviously, it's an issue in India, clearly. And it's an issue on top of that, because if Facebook provides free access, then Facebook becomes the place to do that, right? Which I know is an issue as well. I think that we should come to a point where we consider access to the internet to be a human right, because it is the form of speech. Now, that's easy for me to say, hard to get a government to do that, hard to get companies to pay for that. But I think that's where we will go with this as a society, is we'll recognize that if you don't have access, you don't have the full range of human rights.
Yeah. Niladri?
Yes, sir.
No. Niladri, you can go ahead now.
Yeah. Okay, sir. Good morning, sir. I actually have a small question about when you talked about the higher obligation as a social person and the huge domain of knowledge that is present in the social media. So you have talked about Fiona Lowenstein in one of your talks previously about politic, and you have talked about Eric Feigl dying. So both are polar opposites of one works on clickbaits and the other works on social opinions. So in a world which actually is witnessing the death of applause in post-COVID world, so where do we draw a line of information there in that case? And one more question to add on to that, sir, and that is, what do you think is the future of conventional journalists when these interdisciplinary journalists actually take up the center stage?
So I think I've learned a lot by watching scientists in COVID online. I wrote a post about this, that they have adapted to the open information ecosystem better than in weeks, better than we have in decades. And so I think it's instructional to look at what they did. They used preprint servers to get their scientific papers out very quickly, but they weren't peer reviewed, right? So they used Twitter to peer review. And they also used Twitter to review the reviewers. So there's this guy named Eric Feigl Ding, you heard me talk about in another talk, who just like media uses sensationalism to get a lot of attention, to get more followers. And the other scientists don't like him as a result. And they say, he doesn't have good judgment. Don't pay attention to him. And I find that fascinating that the scientists are reviewing the science and they're reviewing the scientists. And they're in a discussion, they're in an argument. It is a model for what the conversation could be like. They're trying to reach an end, which is better understanding, better facts, better science. And that's how we could look at journalism, I think. So in that, yes, we end up judging people about whether they're qualified or not. There was one science paper that was used by Trump and company to say that this isn't so bad, the COVID, and he had a history of being used by the right wing. Well, if you're going to write about him, give that history, give that context, explain where he fits in, talk to other scientists to get their perspective on this. Give that context to your audience. Also understand how science operates. It's a process. No one has the final answer. We never do that in journalism. We say, oh, here's today's complete answer, and here's my complete story about it. No, it's never complete. And so I think we have much to learn then from how science is operated in this time. Thanks.
Okay, sir. And the first question about where do we draw a line between Fiona Lowenstein and Eric Feigelman?
I think Fiona Lowenstein does the body politic. She is an enabler of community. And so she brings in the experts to talk with her community. She listens to the questions they have. She listens to hear what they're wrong about or worried about. And so she does what a journalist should do, which is to build a bridge between the community and the expert. The journalist is not the expert. The journalist finds the experts.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you, sir.
Yeah, Inian, you can go ahead now.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You mentioned about nurturing relationship with the community as such. But what about the readers whom we are presenting to the story? How are we going to nurture our reader? How are we going to, they've been trained to view stories, read things in a particular way. And how are we going to make a conversation with them? Who is our target as such?
Another great question. God, I love you guys. I wish I could be with you every week. So I'm just reading a book right now called Writing to the World. And it's about how the author, Rachel Scarborough King, argues that when media change, when technology changes, that there are bridge genres. And she argues that the letter we used to send to people, to your aunt, was a bridge genre. And that people understood letters because the postal services had come along and people were sending letters, and they all understood letters. So the first newspapers published letters. The early novels were filled with letters. It was a bridge genre. It was a way to understand the new capability by first starting with something old. And that's what's happening today, where newspapers instead became about stories. And so what the internet becomes about is stories at first. And I think that's fine. But then that's a bridge genre to something new. And I think we can come up with new forms like body politic on Slack, which becomes a new way that people do journalism. And yes, in that they might tell stories, they might write letters, but they also start asking questions and getting answers. They return to conversation. They also might share a database of information you could search. They also might have a performance. There's other things that we can do to perform the goal of journalism through those new tools there. So I think that, yes, the readers may understand present forms and we can use those forms to bring them along, but then we can introduce them to new ideas of how to do this.
Also, I have a comment. You talked about objectivity. Objectivity is being kind of overrated. And scientifically, objective world has always remained vast and diverse. It is the subjectivity that is problematic, and it is the subjective understandings that has always been limited. Why is that we put blame on objectivity?
So I think that, right, another excellent question. I think that the issue is that we believed we were objective when we were subjective, and we weren't honest about it. And that's the problem, is to claim that subjectivity is objectivity is the problem. To be honest about your subjectivity, about your worldview, about your lived experience, about what you know and don't know, about your perspective is critical. So there's a line I used to use years ago that transparency is the new objectivity. That we start with revealing that worldview of ours and reveal our subjectivity so that we can together try to account for that subjectivity to reach facts. Thank you.
Yeah, Nitika, you can go ahead now.
Yeah, so like you said that the role of as a role of journalism is fairness and completeness, but with the advent of time, it has more shifted towards the race to stand out and exclusivity. So, what do you want to say about that?
I'm sorry, the noise came in a little bit there.
Yes.
You were saying, can you repeat that?
I'll just do one thing. I'll type it in the chat box because I'm having very bad bandwidth.
Okay, can we take another question, Nitika? Whilst you do that.
You've missed some people before Nitika.
Suyashi, you can go ahead now.
I wanted to ask, like some US universities opened up. There was a COVID outbreak that now the students and student employees themselves were banned from talking to the media. Like they've been told that they'll be at risk of losing their jobs if they talk to the media. So in a situation the stories are important, but there is a ban or an imposed silence on people. How do you bring in stories?
I only heard part of that. I heard that some people are being told not to talk to media.
Okay, I'll type it to go ahead with the question.
Okay, in the meantime, Shruti VR, can you go ahead, please? Shruti.
This is the problem with technology and Zoom, and I apologize that.
Okay, Anushka.
Yeah, hi, sir. So I, again, am on a low bandwidth connection, so I'll just use my audio. You've spoken a great deal about social media and how it comes in play with, present day journalism. And, now journalism faces a lot of issues like copyright and, or a lot of issues. So, and a lot of people try to look towards big tech, Facebook and Twitter and all of these publications to try and solve some of these things, like paying the publishers for for the news they provide, fact checking and all of that. So what do you think of that expectation that people have from them?
An important question these days. I think what we see is major media companies of old believing that the technology companies stole their revenue, as if God gave them that revenue. And so we see in Australia, Rupert Murdoch, in Germany, Springer, in the US, various companies tell the big platforms that you owe us this money you stole. Well, I don't think they stole it. I think that the technology platforms gave their customers, the advertisers, a better deal. And a more effective and efficient way to advertise. And so we lost that. We also lost our readers in many ways, right? Facebook was not started for news. It was started to get dates. But the users brought news to it. Twitter wasn't started for news. It was started to tell people you were going to be in the bar, but people brought news to it. TikTok was started to lip sync music. And one of the great critics of Donald Trump is on TikTok. The users brought news to these platforms. The advertisers brought their dollars to these platforms. We lost them. It's our own damned fault. And so I get angry when journalism companies especially try to use their political clout, which they have because they are journalists, to convince legislators to pass protectionist legislation, to try to get money from the platforms. Protectionism is not a strategy for the future. And so I think the platforms owe the public better mechanisms to do news, but they don't owe the publishers anything. Now, you could argue that, well, the journalists are employed by the publishers. Yes, they are, but they're also starting their own new ventures now. And if you look at the Australian legislation, it gives advantage to big companies at the expense of small companies. And I think what we see when regulation comes in is that the big companies in technology can handle doing this, and new small upstarts find that it would be more expensive to come in and to compete. So it's a complicated question. And I might sound like a libertarian. I'm not. I'm a Democrat, a liberal in the US. But when it comes to regulation of the internet, I think we need to be careful when we enter in and have an unintended impact. And that's what's happening in a lot of the regulation in Europe and now in Australia especially.
Okay, thanks. That's food for thought.
Yeah, Ananya, you can go ahead now. Hello?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Hello, sir. First of all, thank you so much for such an interactive and beautiful session. We're really having a great time. So my question to you is very simple. We see that, of course, social media has done a great deal when it comes to bringing so many voices to the forefront, and different viewpoints from various communities. They all have a voice now. But at the same time, we see something like fake news. It's spreading at a very fast pace, so much so that even it has the power to incite violence, riots, and even wars between nations. So what, according to you, how, according to you, can we make social media a very safe space?
I don't know yet. I think we're trying to figure that out. I think it's an important question. But I look back again to history, where when printing started, there was a lot of fake news that helped start wars. Same thing happened. And what did we do as a society? We built institutions to assure trust and responsibility, right? We built the institution of journalism. We built the institutions of universities, though they already existed, but how they operated in this. We built the institutions of expertise. And I think what we're seeing now is the need to build new institutions, or for the old institutions to adapt themselves. The problem is that journalism has not adapted itself well. It is still operating in the old method of creating a product called content in a publication. Rather, journalism, I think, should consider its job how to help people find good things. Now, the other thing we're doing is we're concentrating so much on the negative, on the fake news, that we're not doing a good job of spreading the respectful news, the credible news. When we debunk the fake news, we end up spreading it. And so I don't think we're looking at our own impact sufficiently. So I don't have the answers yet, but I think we're in a process of figuring that out. Now, the problem is it's going to take time, right? In the case of print, there was a 30 years war before they figured it out. And I hope we don't have 30 years wars now as a result. But we're definitely going to have more problems, I guarantee that, as we understand how to figure this out.
Abhijit, you can go ahead. Jeff, how long do we have?
As long as you need me, or compare me.
Abhijit, okay.
Sir, I had a question after Ananya, so can I?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Hi, I'm sorry I can't turn my camera on. The bandwidth is really low here. So I'm Shorish. Thank you for this amazing session. So I had this one question. So you had mentioned that objectivity is a lot about power dynamics. So in India, I have seen a peculiar pattern in the way queer issues are conveyed in mainstream news media. The pattern of the portrayal, however, becomes a matter of extracting a story and leaving it at that. So in the context of the Indian journalism, how do you suggest that invest in a community-centric approach, especially when the rhetoric has been that the Indian audience is not ready yet to hear queer issues, or that's been the excuse anyway?
Another great question, another important question. I think that it becomes a question of us having a responsibility to amplify the voices of people in the community. Now, there's a problem with that, clearly. is that that's dangerous for the person in the community. That's easy for me to say as an old white man.
Yeah.
But our experience in the United States, I think, was that what brought us to the point of having gay marriage was the people who had the courage to stand out of the closet they had been forced into by bigots to say, I'm here, you know me. Do you have a problem with that? And people started to realize that they had brothers and sisters and cousins and children who were LGBTQ. And this also was part of entertainment in the US. We had sitcoms on TV that had gay characters. People came to love and recognize as human beings, not as an other. So when I say that, I think a primary job of journalism today, and it should be a primary job of Facebook today, should be to make strangers less strange. So you're quite right that the problem now is that we tend to extract the story. In the case of every year at our school, we bring in the first week community members from the South Bronx, which is a poor community in the US. African-American, Latino, very mixed. And what they often say to us is the journalists come in and they report on crime and on poverty and on our problems. And they don't report on our solutions. They don't report on our heroes. So I think that part of what we need to do here is to bring empathy to the public. So we've talked about empathy from the journalist. How do we bring empathy in the public for queer people? Well, part of that is telling their story. Part of that is allowing them to tell their story so that we don't merely extract their story. Part of that is being aware that the way we tell that story or the way we help them do so can bring more empathy or not. And I think it's when people say that an audience is not ready for something, I think that is fundamentally insulting to that public.
Exactly.
It's true in a lot of ways, yes. But it's the same as when I hear people say, oh, China's not ready for democracy. Bullshit. Any people anywhere around the world are ready to grapple with difficult issues and discuss them together. That's what that's our job in journalism, to do that. So I recognize that the culture in India is different on these issues. And it's easy for me as someone who is straight, white, male, well off in America to say these things. And I don't want to force anyone out of the closet to their peril. That would be very wrong. But for those who are willing to tell their stories, for those who are eager to do, I think it's our job to help them do it as well as we can.
So does it become like an issue of representation and how we are sensitizing, not in a condescending way, of course?
Yes, I also think it's a question of nuance and depth. One of the problems in media, I spared you this spiel, is that we've been mass media. We treat everyone as a mass. And that is part of the problem with objectivity and the idea of the mass. And in America, we had this idea of the melting pot, was we said, oh, everyone's going to end up the same. That's to say they're going to end up like me, because I'm the person in power. I'm the old white man. It took me years. I was taught that when I was a child. Right? And that seemed to be the virtuous thing, was that, oh, we're colorblind. Everyone's going to be the same. Well, that was a way of saying that everyone's going to be like those in power. Instead, we have to value the diversity, the wonderful diversity of our population. That we are not a mass, damn it. We're individuals.
Exactly.
Twitter is not a mass. It's millions of individual voices. And so our job as journalists, I think, more than ever, is to amplify those voices in their own context and form. And if people are going to misunderstand them, then we add the context to help people understand.
Okay, yeah. Thank you so much, sir.
Yeah, Medha, can you go ahead now?
Sir, I had a question. Sorry.
Go ahead. Sir, even I had a question.
No, wait. One at a time. One question. Can you just restrict yourself to one question, please? No follow-up statements because we don't have time. Yeah, go ahead.
Sir, I have one question. In everything that you said, it seems like the active player in these conversations is the community. So I'm wondering what the government's role is in this space then. What are the expectations we have with the government?
hold on just one second. I'm telling somebody I'm delayed. I get very nervous about government having an involvement in speech and in journalism. I think government should stay out. It is our job, and that's why I have a problem with people like Rupert Murdoch lobbying government to get legislation to help them against their new competitors. That's why I have a problem with the laws in Germany about hate speech, which I understand. And there's new laws being planned in the UK about harmful content. I think government should stay out of speech. There's a wonderful but not easy to read speech that was written by John Milton, the poet, many, many years ago, called Areopagitica, in which he argued that if government gets involved with deciding what should and should not be said to try to protect the people, we protect the people from thinking for themselves. We protect them from exercising their own brains to deal with fake news, falsity, hate, and so on. And so I think government should not be in a case of thinking that it can protect us from ourselves. And I also get nervous about government's role in privacy. Government is the biggest threat to privacy because government, if it knows things about us, has guns, has jails, has taxes, has courts, and has ways that they can use those against us in ways others can't. So government is necessary, government is helpful, but our role in journalism is to make sure they stay helpful and they don't turn into corrupt authoritarians like the one we have in our White House right now.
Thank you. So is it okay if I go next?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Sir, I had a question after Sarish.
Yeah, Sarish. Yeah, okay, Sarish.
Sarish was I lost the chance before because of the connectivity, right?
Yeah. So my question was, in some US universities that opened up, there were COVID outbreaks and the situation has been mismanaged. Now the students themselves were banned from talking to the media and told that they will be at a risk of losing their student jobs at the university. So in such situations, how do you report these stories which are important but which can cause harm to the people you are telling about?
I'm serious. You guys just asked the best questions. These are really challenging and great, and I'm excited to be in conversation with you. You raise a lot of issues there, right? What harm do we do as journalism? You also raise a question about privacy and whether there is an expectation of privacy in public. And my response usually is no, that what occurs in public is kind of owned by the public, and it's our field in journalism to report what happens in public. But we have cases in the US where undocumented immigrants hold demonstrations to fight Donald Trump. But if we take pictures of them and report their names, we could end up having them deported by the government. So we have to worry about that and be sensitive to that. On the other hand, when we say we have an anonymous source, so-and-so said, but they don't release their name, we have less credibility with the audience. So it is a difficult balancing question. I think whenever possible, we try to make things public. That's what we do. We free up information. That's our mission as journalists. So I think that's our first goal, but there has to be a but. The but is if it doesn't harm people. And then we've got to be sensitive to that and figure out how to do that, if that makes sense.
Yes, sir.
Thanks for your diligence in coming back after your bad internet.
Yeah, who's next? Sir, can I go ahead?
Yes, please.
Yes, sir.
Yes, please.
Hello, sir. So my question to you is, in a country like India, where there are various communities, often having diverse, at times antagonistic worldview, so in this scenario, how does reporting from the viewpoint of a particular community, I mean, even like you said, we need to let the communities themselves tell their stories. So how can a journalist pursuing social journalism hedge the danger of creating further fissures within the society like India, if we tell stories from a particular point of view?
That's where the job of adding context comes in. That's where, we don't just say, oh, here are white racists and we're going to let them tell their story and stop there, right? That's where we have to call. This is where one of the problems we have in the US right now is, do the journalists call Donald Trump a liar? And there are those who think we shouldn't because that's making a judgment. Well, no, I think that he has a very clear history of lying, and we need to add that context if it's clear. The same question is whether Donald Trump is a racist or is saying racist things. We tend to try to find safe ways to say things. It was racially tinged, right? Or when it comes to police violence, we say there was an officer-involved shooting, rather than saying more directly, the police shot the man. And so I think that we need to recognize the power of our own words, and we need to be as direct as we can be, but we also need to add context. And so if we report on someone who's saying something hateful, because you need to know that that exists in the world, we need to add the context of saying the harm that can do. And that's a judgment on our half. And it's very scary to make judgments, right? Look at Facebook. Facebook is afraid to death of making judgments. They don't want to get rid of anything because they don't want to be accused of making any judgments. Well, they're going to have a bad culture if they don't make judgments. We're going to have a bad culture in journalism if we don't make judgments. That's where transparency comes in. You've got to recognize where we come from, what we say. We've got to have a conversation where you can argue with us. This is not easy.
Yeah, Aisha will take 5 more questions and we are done. Is that okay, Jeff?
Yes, that's fine.
Sir, can I ask, sir?
Yes,
I'm
sir.
waiting for a lot of time.
Yeah,
Okay,
go ahead.
Saptarshi, go ahead.
And after that, yeah, Aisha, yeah.
Sir, good morning, sir. Like, I have a small question. Like, in this world of social media and Medium and all the online platforms, right? So everything is driven by opinions and people's opinions. Why do journalists are told to avoid opinions, sir?
They're told to what opinions? I missed that last few words.
No, in the world of social media and Medium and all those websites, everything is driven by opinions, right? People's opinions. So mainstream journalists are specifically told to avoid opinions. If I'm working on a story on heritage or something, I'll obviously research a lot of heritage stuff, right? So why am I told to not say my opinion on that subject and get the subject matter expert's opinion? Of course, okay. I'll be getting that opinion, right? But I'm not allowed to tell my opinion on the subject.
Right. Okay. So your primary, there's plenty of opinions in the world. Lord, we've got opinions. Everybody has opinions. There's no shortage of opinions. So I don't think it's our primary job to add opinions to the world. Our primary job is to help inform others' opinions and bring them facts and bring them context and bring them value to their arguments and their discussions as a society. Now, having said that, we also see the case where the BBC and the Washington Post and others are cautioning their journalists not to be on Twitter because if they have an opinion on Twitter, it reduces credibility. I also think that journalists are human and we should act human. And the institutional voice is what people don't trust. So I think that there's an issue there where we can have our lived experience, we can have our perspective. In some cases, we can have our opinions, but our primary job is not to do that. Our primary job is to help inform the opinions of others as they have discussions and to bring facts and bring context to that.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, Mayuri, can you go ahead?
Yes, sir. Thank you for taking my question. It was a lovely session. So what I want to ask is, recently Wall Street Journal broke a story that the Facebook policy head in India actually has stringent policies to further right-wing media on Facebook in the Indian cyberspace. So in such scenarios, what do you think is the future of the internet cyberspace as a mode of journalism and as a source of information for journalists, and listening to cyber communities. So yeah, that's my question.
I think that especially in COVID, we have learned, I mean, imagine going through this pandemic with no internet. And as Lord knows, there are people in India who are doing that. And we know how difficult that is. And there are people in the United States as well. But for those who do have it, which is more and more people all the time, thank goodness we have had it. And the journalists, you know, our students now are not going out on the street. They have to find their sources and their stories and their communities using the net. And I think it's a really valuable lesson to be had. I think it shows us how we can reach new people we couldn't reach before anywhere. We can find people who didn't want to be seen or didn't happen to run into on the street. So I think that we're now at the point where the internet is invaluable to journalism, to find people of various communities, to listen to them, and to understand them. And so I think that's what's going to continue to happen. Now, media companies are struggling still with their business online and in digital and in mobile, and they're going to continue to do that. We could do another session just about business models and how that operates. And so some of them are not going to succeed. But I also think, again, the opportunity is for you to think entrepreneurially and to start new ventures online. You are going to be the ones to reinvent journalism. I am depending upon you to do that.
Aisha will take 3 minutes.
I had a follow-up question.
No, can you just?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Okay. So my question is, in China, they don't allow their citizens to use anything but WeChat. They even have a different subsidiary of Google instead of the Google Chrome that we use. And also in India, they banned so many Chinese apps, and particularly in my country, Nepal, the government has banned porn, and many a times they try to restrict the contents artists produced, and also they limit things that what we can post online. So does the states banning apps and regulating people's access to the internet or social media, especially now that the primary source of information for a lot of us is the internet? I'm so sorry for the background noise.
It's okay, it's life.
Does it affect journalism?
Yeah, I don't want to be, I'm going to be very American right now. I am very American. I worry about a Chinese internet. And there are those who say that we should have a Chinese internet, that, oh, it's peaceful and it's controlled and there isn't hate and there isn't this and there isn't that. Well, I think that's that fundamentally robs people of their right of speech and their right to listen and hear. And so I worry that we're headed toward an internet that is split up in that way. And that's why I get concerned about government regulation in the rest of the world. Because I think it's a road toward a controlled internet. It's a world toward a controlled public conversation. And as I said a minute ago, I don't want government to be in that position. That's an American view. That's my view. We have the First Amendment. We tend to think like that. That's our reflex. The internet was built that way. From that American point of view, I think, that Western view of speech. But that's kind of the way I have it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sir, I had a follow-up question.
No, please. Can you just skip it for the time being, please? So Abhijit and yeah, can you go ahead?
Yeah.
Abhijit and Manish, and we'll wrap it up.
Yeah. So, sir, my question is really simple in the way that what you talked about, social journalism and having an impact on a community. So the first thing that comes to my head is community is a very, very diverse kind of, it contains diverse kinds of ideas, identities, and thus problems. Much more so than in the Western world, especially in places like South Asia. So anyway, that is just a comment. My question is, while doing social journalism, how ultimately we are being the negotiators between the communities and the knowledge or truth or whatever torchbearer we are going to. So, but my point is that in South Asia, at least, we have to negotiate with the state first, because mostly, even in the digital atmosphere, there's not, because just I think during or just before lockdown, there was a female young journalist in Kashmir who was just doing an assignment, and she has been imprisoned, and she is in prison, I think, till now. So, in that scenario, for that matter, the Middle East. So, bringing out the narratives of Northeast. Thanks for your mic.
Abhijit, ask your question, please.
Yeah, so the question is this only, that how do we negotiate with the state in areas where the state is much more stringent?
Well, I want to, the first thing you said, I love, and I think, you know, it's hard to name a country that is more diversity on the earth than India. And so as we learn in the United States and in other countries how to deal with bringing out diverse voices, my hope is that India can present a model for all of us.
We can't.
And I think that's hard because there's conflict, there's difficulties, there's issues, but that's exactly where the innovation is going to occur, where it's hardest. And that's where the problems are going to come, is where it's hardest. And so we all have issues of equity and diversity on how we use both media and technology. And we have to grapple with that if we're going to build a good society. And we have choices to make now. And so I would love to watch how that occurs in India. The question of government, yes, I think that it's frightening to see how government is trying to shut down journalism, and in turn will shut down citizens' voices. And so I don't know anything to do but to try to stand up together and to use the force we have, not to get taxes out of Facebook so much as to get journalists out of jail. And Reporters Without Borders and the Committee to Protect Journalists and other organizations like this are wonderful and deserve our support because they give brave support to the brave journalists. And again, as an American, I've got a very easy route here. In Kashmir, in Venezuela, in other countries we can name, in Turkey, there are journalists who are whose very lives are at risk, and we as journalists have to stand together with them and use whatever voice we have to amplify their voices.
Yeah, Manish.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Cool. This would be the last question. Yeah,
okay.
This would be the last question.
So you said that about internally focused journalism and about externally focused journalism. So do you think that internally focused journalism should stand alone, or do you think both of them should work together? Because as much as we help inform the community meet their goals, we as journalists also have an obligation to inform the world about it, right? So should they work in tandem, or is it about us deciding on which one to focus more on?
Great question, and I think your answer is already in the question. It's both, and that's the right answer. In that story I told about mold in public housing, yes, we wrote the story. The students wrote the story for the Daily News, the newspaper, so that the city would know, so there would be pressure on government, and so there was a policy question. At the same time, they recognized that if that's all they did, they weren't helping the community sufficiently. So worrying about the internal and educating them matters. Now, this changes our view of what we are as journalists. Are we merely reporters, or are we also educators? Or as I think it was Objectivity said, are we also negotiators? Are we, what is our role as a journalist? We have all kinds of new definitions of ourselves in how we meet people's needs. So yes, the answer is both.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jeff. It's been wonderful, and thank you for spending for making time for us.
Thank you so much. I mean what I say is that every single one of your questions was probing and smart and informed, and I hope to stay in touch more because I want to see the journalism you make.
Sure thing, and I'll be in touch with you soon. I'll keep bugging you, Jeff. Again.
Please do.
So, yeah.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much, and have a wonderful day. And thank you so much for your time.
Cheers, everybody. Stay safe.
Cheers.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you so much.